My name is Atiron Nunes, I am 55 years old, and I reside in the state of Bahia, where I toil as a construction painter. I have been married for nearly 2 decades and have 2 daughters, who are the apple of my eye. My spouse works as a seamstress in a small garment factory, and thus, through our mutual effort, we earn our livelihood. My tale commences when, years past, I witnessed something devoid of any plausible explanation. Even being the very individual who beheld the event, it taxes my credulity that it truly transpired. Before recounting what my eyes did perceive that night, I wish to share some prior occurrences in that very locale, narratives from other people, who just as I did, ended up observing uncommon phenomena. The lane I sometimes traverse at night to fetch my wife from her occupation remains somewhat desolate to this very day, possessing stretches still with but a few dwellings under construction. In those times, this was a nascent neighborhood, where the land had been seeded for the erection of affordable housing, and when the event befell me, illumination from public sources was sparse. At a certain juncture, beyond a pole whose light spent most of its time flickering, a voluminous tree stood, casting a shadow that rendered this part of the way even murkier than it already was. It was a cashew tree that spanned the road from one verge to the other, and the elder inhabitants there recounted yarns of apparitions and hauntings that were wont to materialize in that vicinity. I would jestingly say that I would prefer to espy a spectre than a thief on that section, and my wife would chide me, saying that I ought not utter such words, and that it was no matter for levity. The people who were compelled to pass along there related that they saw and sensed things lacking any rationale. Once I overheard the story of a man who would depart early, still in the gloom, for his work, and whenever he passed near this cashew tree, he would feel a weight as if someone had leapt onto the carrier of his bicycle. He narrated that he felt as though something had jumped on and the burden it imposed, but upon looking back there was no one there. Then he would continue pedaling, and the weight would vanish as if someone had dismounted and allowed him to proceed unburdened. There were those who would hear someone whistling quite loudly and shaking the boughs at this very spot, and a rumor began to circulate that the tree was haunted and that it was preferable to take another route after nightfall. Even during daylight, hours, it felt peculiar to pass by there. They said the wind would make the branches creak, and many people would avoid traversing there, even in broad daylight. I was never one to credit such things, but my turn to witness something strange in that place arrived. Where my wife was employed, there was a period when numerous orders arrived, and the schedules had to be temporarily altered to manage everything. Previously, she would commence at 7 in the morning and depart around 4 in the afternoon, Monday through Friday. With the revised timetable for a spell, she began at 2 in the afternoon and would leave after 10 at night. It was not so late an hour, but to travel to where our home was situated, the roads were quite eerie to traverse at that time. Around 9-ish, I would leave home on my bicycle to collect her and would wait there. I would always pass by the so-called haunted tree, and my wife would tremble with fear, but I would jest with her, saying that I would eventually see something. I was on that accursed lane, and from afar I espied the tree swaying in the darkness. But there was something more that night. I was already quite near when I saw something emerge from behind the trunk quite slowly and halt there in the middle of the road, gazing at me. It was a black dog of medium build, and its eyes seemed to gleam in the gloom. I stopped the bicycle, and it regarded me for a moment and then departed the road, entering the thicket on the other side. I found that odd, but it was merely a dog, so when it was gone, I continued my way. Upon arriving at my wife's workplace, I learned that she would remain for another hour and would leave around 11 at night. But a van would drop her off at our house, and I ended up returning alone. On the return journey, not a soul was to be seen on the street. It must have been due to the lateness of the hour or the frigid wind that blew that night. I took the same road I had traveled earlier and pedaled slowly without any apprehension, when again, in the shadow of the cashew tree, I saw the black dog standing in the middle of the road, looking at me. But something drew my attention. It appeared much larger this time. It could not have been the same one I had seen half an hour prior. It stared at me strangely, and I confess that I got goosebumps all over. It was then that I heard the sound of a motorcycle approaching from behind me, and for a second I glanced back, but when I turned again, the canine had vanished. There was no way it could have disappeared so quickly, but so it happened. The motorcycle passed me, and I resumed pedaling. I know not why, but something seemed to be coming after me. I would look back, but I saw nothing. Only the sensation of being followed grew. At a certain moment, I looked back and saw a black dog, larger than the one I had just seen before the motorcycle distracted me. I had never seen such a large dog, and those eyes were not normal. I pedaled as fast as I could, leaving the animal behind, and when I arrived home, I was trembling so much that I could barely open the door. It was then that I looked at the corner where a post stood and saw that black dog watching me and pacing back and forth. That was not just a dog. It was something supernatural that only left me in peace after I entered the house. A while later, the van arrived with my wife, and as soon as she came in, I told her what I had seen, but she said she had passed along the same road and had seen nothing, and even chided me for jesting about serious matters. It was not only I who saw that black dog. Other people also espied it. A young man who was constructing his house on the same street as mine recounted that his motorcycle had a problem and he had to leave it locked at the construction site and return to his parents' house on foot. Already in the gloom, on that very road, from afar he saw a dog that appeared small at first, but when he approached a bit closer, he saw that the creature seemed to be 3 times the size of a normal dog. So he ran back and slept at the construction site, only going to his house when dawn broke. From the construction site, he said he had seen the animal walking along the nearest road, as if it was searching for something. There were many accounts in those times when there were not so many houses around here, but when more people began to come and live here, the accounts ceased. Only the older residents still remember the hauntings that would pass through there, and whoever saw it called that thing the midnight dog. The creature appeared small, as if it were any ordinary dog, but you only had to blink, and it would already be your size. No magic trick, no one can explain the supernatural because it has no explanation. Seeing is believing or praying not to see. I had to see to believe, but if you will permit me a piece of advice, prefer not to see to believe. Good night, night. My name is Arnaldo Moraes. I'm 41 years old, and I live in Serra Alta, a municipality in the state of Santa Catarina. Some years ago, I had very strange dreams, and for several consecutive nights, I dreamt of things that came from the shadows and attacked me. They were beasts full of teeth that pursued me in nightmares from which I could not awaken. At that time, my mother-in-law came to live with us, as she was very elderly, and my wife cared for her with utmost tenderness. During that very period, when I began to dream of these bizarre things, my mother-in-law began to utter nonsensical things. She would say she saw a strange woman at the foot of her bed who would call her to go with her. Sometimes it was just a pale woman whom my mother-in-law did not recognize. At other times, she would awaken everyone in the house quite frightened, as she claimed to be seeing a very gaunt woman sitting beside her bed. We even thought it was an effect of the various medications she was taking, but it was far more than a simple reaction to drugs. Until one night, I was returning from another town in my car, and it was already quite late. I had taken on a job with my brother and ended up taking much longer than anticipated to return. On the road, I felt a terrible sensation, as if something very bad was about to happen. So, I called my wife and asked how everything was at home, and she replied that everything was fine, and that she had just lain down beside her mother. Then I felt more at ease. I was almost arriving in Serra Alta when I spotted a woman standing by the roadside. It was at that moment that I felt a sensation, as if someone had just climbed onto my back. It was such a great weight that I could barely breathe. It was then that I realized that this was not of this world. I accelerated my car and drove much faster, and when I passed the strange woman on the road, she had walked to the other side and simply vanished. My heart was beating so rapidly, and my hands were trembling so much that further ahead I had to stop, fearing an accident due to how terrified I was. I exited my car and began to pace back and forth, trying to compose myself. Even today, I cannot describe the sensation I felt. It was then that further ahead, I saw something coming towards me. The eyes gleamed on that dark road, and when the thing was just a few meters away from me, I could see that it was an enormous black dog. I ran back to my car, and when I looked, again, it had disappeared. I thought I was going mad. First a strange woman and now a black dog with glowing eyes. I started the car and drove away quickly, heading for my house. When I got out of the car and went to open the front door, I felt that something was watching me, and when I looked towards the corner, I saw the black dog again, standing there looking at me. I could barely open the door. My hands were trembling so much, and when I entered, I heard my wife crying and ran to her. Then I saw that my mother-in-law had passed away, and our relatives were already on their way. It was a night full of surprises, and one worse than the other. In the days that followed, my nightmares ceased, and the bad feeling passed, and we tried to carry on with life. I told some relatives what I saw on the night my mother-in-law passed away, and they said that what I had seen was a black dog. Its appearance is like an announcement that something bad is going to happen. In this case, it was the death of my mother-in-law. I don't know why I saw it. I think the supernatural is like that, without explanation. It happens to those who don't expect it and leaves without a trace. Some believe that the black dog protects someone, others that it announces death. I believe that it comes to guide those who are leaving, and sometimes we can see when it comes to fetch those whose time here has come to an end. Good night. Night. My name is Leonardo Damião, son of Luis Damião, who worked for many years in Vicarious, tending cattle and also horses here in the state of Paraíba. From that time, he recounts some stories of things he saw in the midst of those woods, but none compares to the tale of Dona Helena's dog, one of the most frightening things I have ever heard my father tell. So stay with Luis Damião and the strange dog of the earthen jar. There existed in those times some stories that the people would tell about folks who did things that only God knew the cause of. Each story would leave you spooked when you went to bed at night, and I myself, often without believing, would ponder, what if the recounted tales were true? One of those many that I saw and heard tell when I worked in Vicarious was about Dona Helena's cursed earthen jar and the creature that guarded it. There, in the early 1900s, lived in those lands a lady named Dona Helena, a widow without children, who had inherited much land and a house where she lived alone. The wicked tongues of the people said, even without proof, that this woman had a pact with the devil and would converse with him every night when he himself would come to visit her. No one had permission to enter her lands, and the one who kept watch was a black dog, one of those that didn't even have white in its eyes. They said it was a large dog that would chase anyone who tried to invade the place, and that at night they would see a shadow walking beside it. That's why not even a thief dared to enter, because a woman living alone in those times would be an easy victim to overpower. But not even that happened to the widow. She lived her years alone in that place that the woods were taking over, and the house seemed to age along with her. People from that time recount that old Helena would hide money scattered around the house because she trusted no one, and that much of her inheritance was scattered in earthen jars buried throughout her property, and even she no longer knew. where she had left them, until years later she passed away, and her body was buried in a tomb that she herself had ordered to be built behind the house. And so, not even in death did she leave her lands. They say that the dog was still seen on moonlit nights, howling and guarding the place that time was now intent on ending. Even many years later, there were still people who said that there were buried treasures in that place, and they would say that one day they would go after them. One of these men worked with me for many years, and his name was Dionisio. Everything he earned went to card games and drink. That was his life. He only talked about easy money and wealth, but his life was in misery because of the crazy bets he made. Once he bet so much that he couldn't pay and found himself in serious trouble because the man he owed threatened him and said that if he didn't pay, he would collect his debt with blood. Since the money was a lot, and we were poor, even gathering the money of several friends, there was still no way to pay. So he said that he would go the next day to the house of the widow Helena to look for the treasures that they said were buried there, and that he would only leave when he found something that would help him pay his debt. Some of the older workers said that looking for things in those lands would not be the solution, but since it was a matter of life and death, it would be better for Dionisio to die at the hands of a haunting than at the point of a knife or a bullet. And that afternoon, we saw him leave with a shovel, saying that he was going to the old house of the widow Helena. The next day, he didn't show up for work, nor the day after, and worried about what might have happened. I went with two others to Dionisio's house to see what could have happened. He lived in a simple little house, very close to a curve, where there was only fence and woods. His father had won that piece of land many years ago, and now it belonged only to Dionisio, who had no wife or children, only a dog that would roam free out front and would start barking when someone passed on the road. I knocked on his door, and a somewhat hoarse voice said from inside that he would open it right away, and we sat in the shade of a tree to wait. When we saw the man, he looked sick. In fact, he looked as if he were dead, with those sunken eyes and wounded lips. He came and sat down, saying that he would never again pass even in front of the widow's house. And I asked him why, and he said that the stories were true. The stories they told about that place were all true, and that he saw it with his own eyes. The man sat down on a stone in the shade of the tree and recounted what happened to him when he was in the haunted lands. I went with a shovel and a tool to dig. I had no choice. I kept digging around what was left of the house and remembered that people said the widow might have hidden it in the bedroom floor. I went there and started digging and found nothing, but I swear it seemed like there was a person beside me. Wherever I went, I walked around the house and could have sworn I saw the shadow of someone walking right beside me. I entered the house, and that feeling of not being alone wouldn't leave me. When I saw that I wasn't going to find anything, I took another turn to leave and only saw something running through the thicket. I thought it was a fox that must be living around there. And I took my way out and saw the fence, and when it was almost dark, I looked towards the house and saw that woman standing in one of the windows. Then I turned around all goosebumps and ran to pass the fence when I heard that thing running through the thicket behind me. I ran and dropped the things I had in my hand and threw myself over the wire, falling on the road, and only heard that growl coming from inside the thicket. Then it returned, and I ran down the road. That place is really haunted, and there's a creature that guards it, a kind of big dog that chases anyone who's inside there after dark. But I know why I didn't find anything. They say that whoever goes after the gold of those who have already died can't go during the day. They have to go at night, because during the day they don't find anything. Only who is crazy to go in there with that woman and that creature. I won't go even during the day, imagine at night. Another story that occurred around that same time was that of two young couples who invented going to the old house of the widow Helena as a joke. And at night, these saw ugly things there. The one who told me was the young man who was the son of one of my compadres. and I heard from the young man's mouth what he saw on a Saturday with a full moon when he was in the lands that they say are haunted. I had gone to the market to buy some things and ended up going to the house of this my compadre who had some birds that I wanted to buy. We had coffee and stayed listening to the song of a good trincaferro like any other when he commented on what his son had seen. I told him the story I had heard a while back about Dionisio and what went after him, and my compadre said that his eldest son had also seen it, and at night what happened was even worse. I asked where the young man was, and he told me that he had gone to church with his mother, but would be back soon, and I waited to hear the story from his own mouth. Half an hour later, he arrived with his younger brother and his mother, and my compadre called him and asked him to tell me what he saw at the house of the widow Helena, and he told me this. I was with my girlfriend and another couple who were our friends. We were coming from a birthday party when this friend of mine said that once, passing by with his father at night, he saw two red eyes following them from the other side of the fence. But I didn't believe him and said that I had the courage to go to the door and knock, calling for the widow Helena. We started laughing, and I was saying that he didn't have the courage, and he was saying that it was I who didn't. At that, he and I jumped the fence, and the girls stayed right at the gate leading to the road, looking at us and asking us to come back. We took the path to the house, and the undergrowth was high because of the rains that had been falling in recent days. So, when we saw the door, I already heard that scream coming from inside, and the girls started screaming, saying that there was a creature running towards us. When we looked, there was a kind of very large dog with those strange eyes. We ran to the fence with the creature at our heels and ran out onto the road with the girls. From afar, we only saw the silhouette of the animal that had run after us. Now going back to the house, there is a demon that guards that house and those lands, and whoever enters, it runs after them. Other stories were told about people who passed on the road that became known as the Widow's Road. Many said they saw a strange animal running on moonlit nights around the ruins of the old manor house, and said they heard screams coming from that same place. As far as I know, no one ever found any treasure in those lands, but the ghost stories multiplied there. Even today you can still see an old ruin covered by the undergrowth, and the fence almost doesn't exist anymore. Where the house used to be, there are tall trees that hide what was once the widow Helena's manor house. Even so, people are still afraid to pass on that road at odd hours because they say that a creature similar to a dog appears and chases anyone who dares to invade the widow's lands. Good night.